Woo. Hello, boxing fans around the world. Thank you for joining us once again for another episode on Talkin Fight and Boxen247. Boy, do we have a cracking episode lined up for you today. This is the challenge. If Tyson Fury were alive, let's say 50 years ago, I don't know. But the point matter is how would he stack up against the heavyweights of the past? We talked about the heavyweights of the present yesterday, but this was the challenge. So let me roll through just to get this whole thing started. How you doing, Kristian?
I'm fine, but I think you'll find that Tyson Fury would be in a circus sideshow, not a boxer. But just the first comment.
Listen to this list that I've discovered. It's absolutely incredible. Let me just start off with someone who we can all appreciate, Joe Louis, also known as the Brown Bomber. But unbelievably, he was only 6'2" and had a 76-inch reach. I don't know if anyway. So going back to like some of the more historic boxers of the past. Let me tell you about Rocky Marciano, though. Again, whether this guy would be considered heavyweight today, I'm not sure. He's 5'10.5" with only 68-inch reach. That's incredible. Sonny Liston.
Average weight in the 180s, I think you find Marciano.
Sonny Liston, 6'1", 84-inch reach. I mean, these guys were brilliant in their time, but would they be any match? I mean, going back to our all-time favorite, Muhammad Ali, he was only 6'3", 78-inch reach. We'll talk about him in a sec, I'm sure. Joe Frazier, 5'11.5" with a 73-inch reach. That blew me away when I read that. George Foreman, 6'3", not bad, but still no match. 78-inch reach. Ken Norton, 6'3", 80-inch reach. Larry Holmes, 6'3", 81-inch reach. Our good friend Tim Witherspoon, 6'3.5", 78-inch reach. Our good Canadian friend Trevor Berbick, 6'2", 78-inch reach, although he might be Jamaican. Good old Mike Tyson, guess what he comes in at?
Officially, he was 5'11", but they say he was 5'10".
Yeah, 5'10", 71-inch reach. Incredible, eh? And our good friend Lennox Lewis, biggest of them all, 6'5", 84-inch reach. Incredible. So there you go. There's, by comparison, given the fact that our boy Tyson Fury is 6'9". I mean, these guys, yes, they would give him a fight. Given the various boxing styles have changed over the years, some have implemented, some have innovated. But at the end of the day, I can't see any one of those guys beating Tyson Fury. Can you? I mean, argue away if you want.
No, I mean, the first point I will bring up, excuse me if any facts are wrong, because this is all going to be going by memory, but it's all, well, okay, forget that. Prior to, I will say, the Klitschko's, every single heavyweight that was of any size, let's say, for example, 6'6", I'm not going to remember every example, but go back, you had Jess Willard, that was knocked out in the second round famously by, that was it? Not Jack Johnson. He knocks out, he's the one that knocks out Jack Johnson and finished his
that by saying famously.
Sorry?
You said famously, and I thought...
Oh, yeah. You had Jack Johnson. He had such a long career. Then you had, it was a famous knockout. It was after, 13th round or something. It was after a long fight. And it was famous for the fact that a lot of people said that Jack Johnson actually threw it, because when he was knocked down, he was there famously shielding his eyes from the sun. No, you don't do that if you are concussed. So back in those days where money really did talk, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some wrongdoing back then. But anyway, Jess Willard knocked him out, and then you had the chap who was dominant after that. Remember his name in a moment, but Jess Willard was big and he was cumbersome. You then had the Italian guy who came in, who was he did a lot of acting as well, but he was huge, and he was Primo Carnera. That's it, Primo Carnera. He came in, he was cumbersome, Italian, did a lot of acting, he did some wrestling, but it was a joke. Anything that was sort of north of 6'2", 6'1" was just regarded as wrong and laughed at. They would not have any kind of future in them. Now with the weights, and it only become when you had moving into the 70s that heavyweights actually then, okay, I will say this, probably Sonny Liston was probably the first heavyweight who had some size to him, and his weight, if I remember right, fighting weight was around the 210, 215 mark. You then had obviously Cassius Clay, but Clay was early on. He was very 193, 195. I think, if memory serves me right, his heaviest fighting weight was I think about 201, but that was only for a couple of fights. He was in the 190s. My point with that is that, he's a bridgerweight. No, not a bridgerweight. He's a cruiserweight. Cruiserweight, yes, absolutely. Not a heavyweight, not a super heavyweight. Okay, yeah, Ali come back after 3.5 years out. He had put on weight. Was the second carnation of Ali better than the first carnation? We don't know, but we were then with fighters that were then up into the 217. Larry Holmes came in. His average fight weight was around 215 into 220. It went up as he got older, as is usually the case. But I think back to Larry Holmes, one of my favorite fighters. I still think, what was Larry Holmes? 6'3", around that kind of size, 220 pounds.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong with his height, 6'2",
No.
6'3", something around there.
You're bang on.
220, that's regarded as small. He'd be pushed down now into bridgerweight if it goes, and it obviously goes from WBC onto the other sanctioning bodies as well. But regardless of what the weight class is, it's still regarded as small, and somebody that you'd have to be an immense amount of skill to get over the first hurdle, which is the size, as generally the case and not always the case. With the size then becomes reach and a whole load of disadvantages that you'll first of all put against you as a fighter before skill comes into it. But the Klitschkos were regarded as, or they turned out to be, because when they first turned pro back in I think it was about 97 for Vladimir, and I remember the two were going slowly up the ranks. They were being reported it'd been much of a joke, and they're beating bums. It's the usual sort of early career journeyman, whatever. They were saying they were stiff, they were this, they were that. Okay, Vladimir's early success was a little bit delayed. Vitali did better early, but they were still considered as robotic. And through to the end, Vladimir loosened up a little bit. But then out of nowhere, big heavyweights come along, or heavyweights that were smaller were becoming bigger. For example, Lennox Lewis, when he lost his first loss to Oliver McCall, he then moved from trainer Pepe Correa, I think it was, who was in Sugar Ray's corner for quite a few fights, but it wasn't Angelo Dundee. Now, when Lewis came back after the first defeat, the one thing that his trainer Manny Stewart did with him was get him to put on some weight, and he become more of a unit and was more in line with today's heavyweights. Otherwise, when we're comparing all these fighters, he's going to be at a disadvantage again. Tyson, who I think is still for me the best heavyweight, that's another discussion, but he would still struggle with the taller guys, which he did throughout his career. He struggled with Bone Crusher Smith, or Bone Hugger, however you want to put it. Tony Tucker, very good fighter. He was 6'4", but these are only 6'4", not 6'6", not 6'7", not 6'9". I think we can leave 7'2" Valiev out the equation. Don't know, in the future, give it 10 years, we'll have mobile 7'2" fighters. You never know. But it changed over time, thank God. But, when you start, just my first thing, long story cut short, size was such a huge thing, would be a huge thing now with the big heavyweights. So if you're going to pitch fantasy fights with nowadays these bigger units, which are heavyweights, put them in with the early 210, 220 guys, which is big for back then. And the further you go back, the smaller they were. Technically a heavyweight way back is a light heavyweight, cruiserweight at most. Too many disadvantages. And when people, and I know I will get shot for this, but when people say, oh, whatever champion back then would beat the champion now, sorry, they are being sentimental. they are putting aside the fact that you are at a physical disadvantage. And the problem now is not like they're all big now and they've got no skill. No, they're big now and they have skill.
Exactly.
Bloody hell, what do you do about that? But sentiment plays a lot with a lot of people when they look back, back to the 70s, further back, the smaller they were. And it's just not comparable. Rocky Marciano, he was late 180s, early, just, just squeaking 190s, I think, with his weight around that area. You cannot, with that, the punch would not put a dent in these big heavyweights now, or heavyweights 10 years ago. Heavyweights in the 90s, it wouldn't.
Right.
Absolutely not. There's a huge difference and too much of a disparity to even start thinking, the big fighter, what's he got to do? Punches will be bouncing off them, reach, everything. Non-comparable. Just the start.
Absolutely. And then as a bit of a sidebar, we are told back in the day when hockey, ice hockey in particular, these guys were quite good at their sport back, in the 50s and 60s, but they were also fueled by red wine on the bench, and that was quite the norm. So things have changed considerably over the decades when you come to factors now, such as I mentioned earlier, innovative styles. But you talk about, someone innovating on the fly in the ring to come up with that kind of response, if you will, to the opposition, the rope-a-dope. I don't think these things are trained to you. So anyway, so now you have training, as I mentioned prior to the Fury fight, nutrition. Did the fighters of 20 odd years ago even have nutritionists or therapists of any kind? I'm sure they had great trainers, potentially great managers, but at the end of the day, did they have full-on teams to help them prepare for their fights? And the answer probably is no. These guys are fighting on, what they learned, if you will, on the street, which was honed in their various schools. But at the end of the day, I'm going to argue even up to 20 years ago, in your example is 20 years ago, Mike Tyson era, kind of. So the reality of it is at his prime, Mike Tyson wouldn't stand a chance against Tyson Fury.
That is one. I've actually don't know why this is. Excuse the microphone. The volume seems to be wavering up and down for some reason, but maybe there's some auto mode.
It's just your excitement level. Come on.
Yes, love a chat about the heavyweights. Well, Mike Tyson, you see, I think he is in a class of his own. There's a lot of Mike Tyson haters out there. At his peak, and then bear in mind it's a very short peak, which was 85 to 88, the best. And as much as I still think he would have beaten the big guys now, he would have severely struggled. And when you start thinking about trying to put Tyson in with a 300, up to a 300 pound, or sorry,
Right.
20 stone Tyson Fury, I just can't imagine how.
Right.
Maybe he couldn't, but I can't see, as much as Tyson could be ineffective against Fury. I just can't see then, Tyson landing on. You've got that other thing. Well, the heavyweight's still got to be quick enough to land. And I think again in his heyday, 85 to 88, his defense was very good. The Tyson of in the 2000s, go back into the 90s, was different. Defense wasn't there.
Right.
When Kevin Rooney was taken out the corner, but it's imagined. Unfortunately, we would never know.
If Tyson Fury was somewhat of a lucky fighter, and let's say in the matchup, you had Mike Tyson getting a lucky punch, Tyson Fury has proven that he can take the heavy punch. He has got a good chin and can come up from a knockdown. So even if back in the day, Mike Tyson at his height got that lucky shot in, I don't know if it would knock out Tyson Fury.
Yeah, I don't think that he would get to him in that way. I just think that he would be threatening throughout the bigger fighters. When they struggled with Tyson, would go into a bit of a shell. Looking at big fighters, you got, like I said, you've had Tony Tucker, You had Bone Crusher Smith. You had Mitch Blood Green. The taller ones, the 6'4s, he did struggle with. So he would struggle. And he went the distance with those. Okay, not all of them, but that's when he did struggle, was with a taller fighter. Because, as we were saying, with, disadvantages, him at 5'10" would go in at, all these natural disadvantages. Okay, made it up with other things, but too much of a disadvantage to overcome first off. It's completely different. And, how's it going to, joking earlier, but how is it going to be in 20 years' time? Are they going to be bigger? Is 6'6", is that the new norm now for a heavyweight? Because it seems that 6'3", 6'4", what was considered huge and a circus sideshow years ago is now the norm.
Right.
Curious
Exactly.
to see, at what point does it stop? Yeah. I don't think we'll ever have a fleet-footed Valuev type of fighter, but I think it's like how it is now for a while. Training methods have changed, and these big chaps can move now. Never used to be able to.
They can move, but
And
I am curious, because you talk about the longevity of their career. They're not that long in the ring, quite frankly, and that might be due to that combination of size and, let's even just say that the heart's ability to handle that kind of, or endure that kind of workout, if you will, for any long time. Whether you're talking about the actual length of the fight or the length of the career. So I think if you're that big, and take American football players, for example, these guys are huge, 300-pound boys, and yet their careers are only 2 or 3 years long. You have to wonder whether their hearts can handle that kind of exertion.
personally, I disagree there, only for the fact that you look at the average retirement age. Okay, that's a little bit misleading because it can be argued they're just going on too late. But with the way heavyweight champions are going and active top tier heavyweights are going, they are now going on to a longer age. Go back 20 years ago, it was considered old as soon as you were reaching 35. That is now not considered old whatsoever. I remember when Ali was in the rematch with George Foreman. He was 32, in Kinshire. Now, that was, too old, too washed up, at 32. You got Klitschko that was through to 42. You had, George Foreman, he's got the record, 46. They are going on later now. The new norm is 40 years old. I did an article today. There's a fighter turning pro. He's 39.
Wow.
Yes. Reports on that
What,
one
what,
later.
what, if I were writing,
It
if I were writing in the media, I would call those guys cagey veterans.
Yes. Seasoned, very seasoned.
Right.
Yeah, they're going on later. It's what is the cause of that? And that is, I'm just trying to think when it all changed. It changed in the 90s because in the 80s, Larry Holmes, even if he did go on at a certain level, actually to quite a late age, he was 52 when he had his last fight in 2002. He was, again, I remember when he fought Spinks, as in Michael. We fought him twice. Now, he was 36 when he fought Spinks the first time, and at 36 was regarded as old. Not getting there. People talk now, coming towards the end of their career, when you're talking about 35, 37-year-olds, no, you are washed up. That was the 80s. The 70s, it's gone from like sort of early 30s, mid-30s to the 90s, would have been late 30s. Now they're going well into their 40s. I'd hate to think how old Luis Ortiz really is. But no, okay, Klitschko, 42, come back. Okay, lost to Joshua, but he was still very competitive. That was still top tier. 40 still the champion before running into Fury. They are later now. That has changed over the past 20, 30 years. That's one thing that has happened. Where this supersize and where it all changes, where and how it's all changed, I really don't know. Like you said, the nutrition has changed, but what makes a bigger guy be more? Because I'm just trying to recall some of the write-ups and some of the reports that were done when these big fighters were coming in, and I remember words being used. You have, Michael Grant, he failed at top level. Of course, he went in with Lennox Lewis as undefeated. Now, Michael Grant was just one that just come up in my head. He was 6'9". Had a bit of a weak chin, but he was very naturally athletic. It's as it's this naturally athletic was a word that was used very much in the 90s to these bigger fighters. Yet it was the 90s it all changed when it started going to 6'5" into 6'7". Klitschko's late 90s. Why you had that surge? I can only guess it must have been advances of training, nutrition, as you said.
Well, you know what though, there is the other angle on this, and that is what influences young men and women to engage in the sport of boxing. And if it's media, then the answer would be money, because in the late 90s you had the influence of the internet slowly but surely creeping in on the sport. And you take a look, therefore, if I'm a manager, I want someone with drawing power, not just to fill a 15,000 seat arena, but now to start filling in pay-per-view sales as well. So that might be an influencing factor when it comes to being a manager and peddling, if you will, your roster that is now not only seasoned, but is a name value and has draw, therefore money at the box office, not just bums in seats, but online ticket sales, which are now, I mean, how much did Tyson Fury rake in this weekend?
They were saying that Fury was 60 and Wilder 40.
Wow, unheard of numbers.
It was okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yes, no, they were splitting at 60-40 with the projected 100 million that was in the pot for the two of them.
Truly incredible. But there you go. So that's what I might argue as well, because how hard would it be to go around the world if you had, say, an unlimited budget and find the best of the best who were in this super category of heavyweight, someone who could, your job, young man, is to go find out if there's anyone out there who can beat Tyson Fury, and after a year's of walking around the earth, he comes up with 5 boys who are 6'10", 280 pounds, and can really box, unbelievably, but can really box. I mean, how many guys I'm going out there now, but how many guys are in Nigeria right now who are boxing, who are completely undiscovered, but are huge, big boys? We don't know. How many guys in India are there that are boxing right now that are absolutely huge? We don't know.
Completely agree. It's something which I've often thought about with all of this. You've got people which are in countries or whatever which haven't got the funding, training, etc. to break through. Would be interesting if there was ever anybody that was just overlooked. Yeah, I'd be curious to know that.
But if that is the mandate, for example, if that is the mandate, if I'm a Bob Arum kind of guy, and I realize that these big names are drawing $100 million, mainly due to pay-per-view sales, then I'm getting my team out there on the road, and they're going to go find me more Tyson Furies.
Yeah, you've got the is it the Japanese chap? I'm just trying to remember his name. He there was a Chinese or Japanese fighter, big, and they were trying to build him up to fight AJ, and he's got an unblemished record. But in his last fight, he really struggled and completely heavyweight, super heavyweight, very big heavyweight, like a 6'6" chap. He fought a few months ago and nearly came unstuck because he was more of that robotic, stereotypical big fighter, which he'll never get anywhere, unfortunately. Very, very big fighter. One question I wanted to put to you, I know we've briefly discussed it before, but with Fury, as he is this super huge tank unit that he is he more effective now or when he was, let's say, Fury 1 in his peak, obviously, when he beat Klitschko, and his weight was way different. His look was way different. Zhang, that's the one. Yep. Yeah, he's what I call a typical 6'6" chap that's just, couldn't move and he nearly come stuck, and that was against the journeyman. So as soon as he moves up, he'll get beat. But there's been nothing from him at all because I think the penny's dropped that he's never going to get anywhere. But that's boxing. Um, which Fury do you think is more effective? Phase 1, if you want to look at that way, or this huge phase 2? Because the thing that has got me thinking about this is that this weight was put on, as far as I'm concerned, to beat Wilder, because you had the light. Obviously the first Wilder fight, he was very light. He then had the 2 matches. He had Tom Schwartz, the first one. That was 4th round KO. Then you had Otto Wallin pushed very hard. And I know John Fury was saying he's too light. His big frame is too drained. And they've countered it now with this super weight that's kicked in. As this super weight, now I think the problem is, by the way, I don't think it's just the weight that he's drained. I just think it's the weight after the weight loss, because he certainly wasn't drained with the lead up to Klitschko and in the Klitschko fight. That was an absolute masterclass, which he did. And there was no weakness there whatsoever. That was not, as much as he was a similar weight, in the Klitschko fight, to obviously the early comeback with, in the first Wilder fight and Schwartz and Wallin. I think it's the case of he was too drained that way after the 8 stone loss. Now, do you think he would ever go back in weight, or do you think that's this unit that is how he is for all possible fighters in the future? Bear in mind, you think he could retire. I think he's got one more fight left in him for the Big Brit one, and then he will retire. Legacy, and obviously what he would regard, rightly so, as easy pickings now against AJ. But I'm just curious to know what, is he the more effective fighter, heavier or not? It's like George Foreman, taking everything into consideration. Yes, he was a bigger puncher. He was fearsome in his first carnation, but he wasn't very clever. Where the second Foreman was bigger, heavier, more fat, more conservative, and he's more of a thinking fighter. Was he more effective then? It's something I've had this conversation with so many people, and a lot of people say, oh, yeah, well, obviously in the 70s, or some people say, in the 90s. It's a curious thing. Does weight really help? What do you think?
The answer is if you know how to use it. So
Yep.
with age comes experience, and that impacts the boxer on many different levels. So you're not only a smarter boxer, but you're also more intelligent. And a great example, and I go back to it, a great example would be how Tyson Fury was demonstrating how he eats now, as opposed to when he was a younger fighter. Okay. So as an experienced boxer, he now knows that he needed to put on the weight, keep on the weight, but have that weight used to his advantage, not just if it was leaning on and tiring out the opponent, but actually, if you will, as padding to stave off those blows. Anyway, if you add all this up, I would argue that this incarnation of Tyson Fury is absolutely unbeatable. I mean, Deontay Wilder gave it his all and could not knock out Tyson Fury, period. And I don't think Anthony Joshua or Usyk is going to be victorious when they go up against this incarnation of Tyson Fury. He's only, if he's getting bigger, I'd be blown away. But right now, he's at his prime. Now you say he's got one more fight to maintain that legacy. Fair enough. But he also has the experience and the ability, physical ability, to withstand what is thrown at him. And does a Usyk or an AJ have that capability of knocking him down, knocking him out? I'd argue not.
I think Usyk, if anything, stands the more chance just because of tactically, with his brain, being able to somehow get around the size. But I would still have Fury as the favourite 60-40 for me. But it's going to take a clever box puncher that's going to stand any kind of chance. If that is Carl, that quickly looks. Yes, it was. It was after the Schwartz fight, not Schwartz fight, because that was the KO in the 4th round. There was no problems with Ben Davison then. It was after the Wallin fight that John Fury went absolutely ballistic, saying he was weak, he was that, there was nothing in his punches, there's no... it was just going absolutely balmy. And yes, that's why Ben Davison was taken out the corner. in with, obviously, Sugar Hill Stewart, and the rest is history, literally. It goes back to Muhammad Ali. I know we're going away from Fury, but it could be said with him when he was Cassius Clay. I know he changed his name to Muhammad Ali before he didn't accept the draft into the army. But if we just say, for argument's sake, now Clay before the 3.5-year layoff and Ali afterwards, is Clay the better fighter than Ali? Because there's a big weight difference between those. I mean, in as Ali, or the second part, he was never fighting at the early 190 pounds. Never. He came back and it was around the 210s, 217s, even went up into the 220s in his second half of the career. In fact, I think career heaviest was about don't quote me on this, 230, the last fight with RIP, Canadian fighter, help me with this one, murdered by his nephew over land. Trevor Berbick, yes. RIP. That was his last fight. He was about 232. He came in around the 217 mark for the Holmes fight, but drained. That's where you get the very infamous saying from Angelo Dundee, light isn't right. But yeah, I think that the light situation, going back to Fury, when he was in the first Wilder fight and obviously the two fights in between, he was too light after the 8 stone loss. And that's what happened with Ali, because he had, by complete coincidence, 3.5 years out in the ring as well, came back that little bit heavier. Similarities there, quite interesting. But, Fury now or Fury versus Klitschko, who's the best?
Wow. That's a good question.
Because that with Klitschko that night, he was masterful. That was fantastic.
Absolutely. But you know what I'd argue? I would argue age and experience counts. It matters because that experience is bolstered by a team. I would have to argue that over the years, Tyson Fury has relied on a team to make him a better boxer. He doesn't just grow up naturally year after year becoming a better boxer. So, I'm going to go. I'm not wavering on this one. I think Tyson Fury is at his peak right now, and he can beat anyone right now, including.
I think he does pose more of a threat now. But the other thing I just want to, before I forget this, I think that all depends who he's fighting as well. Let's say that he was going to have 5 fights. Would he continue at this weight? No, I don't know. I think he would come in, personally, I think he'd come in lighter. And I just think he was this little bit heavier than the Wilder 2 fight, because I think that was just a not so good camp. Because, as much as he was always been hefty, and, this second carnation, heavier Fury, it was not quite the bag of milk. No, he wasn't the last one. Where I was moaning about Wilder coming in 7 pounds heavier. Oh my God, when he took the top off Fury, I thought, okay, so he's not coming in, full on. So maybe one will even out the other one. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Ali, let's go back to Ali. Was he better as Cassius Clay or the heavier Ali after, dodging the draft? George Foreman, was he better first time around or second time around? It's just the subject of weight and how it does or doesn't help you. And I think that is the reason why I'm just bringing this up and focusing on this, is because then bring that over to what we were saying in the beginning. Is weight a big issue when we're comparing Fury and fighters from the past? I don't just think it's the weight. I think it's like the things that you were bringing up at the beginning. Reach. These are big deficits that you could be the best boxer, in the world, but there's a reason why, the best ever light heavyweight couldn't touch a heavyweight, because if they were in their respective classes, you've got that weight to overcome. Doesn't matter how much skill level is there.
Right.
That's why Bob Foster, who's probably one of the best light heavyweights ever, went up to heavyweight, lost to Joe Frazier, because you've got that natural weight deficit. Bearing in mind that Joe Frazier was not particularly heavy himself, as you stated earlier, or big, or anything, in fact. There's weight divisions and there's weight disparities that will dictate the outcome, or would put the huge block or barricade there that they'd have to get over before skill even comes into it. Fury versus, I think, anybody, he could fit in. As much as he might not be the best ever in history or whatever, he certainly would hold his own just on size and stature forgetting skill with anybody. You
I
know,
would have to
in
imagine
any
too.
era, and you cannot say that about many fighters.
No, but I'll tell you what you can add into this mix, and that is the use of technology. I mean, take a look at the advantage that today's boxer has over yesteryear's boxer. They have technology, and I don't mean power punches or recording speed of punches or movement. I'm talking about just access to video and being able to analyze your opponent before meeting him. You know, like in a day gone by, that was not a factor. Um, you were trained at your level of skill and thrown into the ring, and that's why there was probably so much changeover in terms of champions as the years went on throughout the 80s and 90s. Nowadays, you have much more clinically taught boxers, and now when you combine that with size and reach that the Fury has and that he's shown he's capable of using, like that is unstoppable. That's a juggernaut.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot with something. Lennox Lewis versus Fury now.
Lannis Lewis in his prime when he won the gold for Canada.
Yeah, Canada, Jamaica, England. Okay, we'd call him whatever. At his peak in the pro, and let's say his peak was
Okay.
probably a few fights under being in with Emmanuel Stewart after his first loss with Oliver McCall. That's probably at his peak. Not the one that was life or death with Klitschko.
Right.
But a peak
Lennox Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good fight. It would be a good fight. As I mentioned earlier, Lennox Lewis comes in at 6'5", so he's still 4 inches shorter, 2 inches shorter than Wilder. Less of a reach, but technically he might have it. Given his, shall we say, shortcomings, put those in air quotes, Lennox Lewis just might have a chance in his prime against Tyson Fury today. I would argue he'd have a chance.
One of the few, absolutely. Yep. Okay, let's go to Vladimir Klitschko. Although I know Fury beat him, Klitschko was the end of his career, and that was Fury, the lighter version. But Vladimir in his prime, and we shall say about 2010 for that. What do you think the result would be?
That's a good one. I mean, there's completely different styles when you talk about the Russians or the Ukrainians in particular, and then the styles that they're bringing to boxing and they brought to boxing. So if you're talking about that original style that hadn't been seen, if you will, these guys came out of nowhere, if you ask me. Although enthusiasts might argue that, but at the end of the day, when you're following the heavyweights, all of a sudden you've got two guys named Klitschko, and all of a sudden, they're putting Ukraine on the map, if you will, and it's due to their different style. They brought a different style to the game. So would a Tyson Fury, without access to video, without having, just plop them in the ring together without knowing each other, that would be a pretty interesting matchup, quite frankly. Interesting, hard to call. But again, size and reach might have some impact. Because as I said earlier, today's Tyson Fury proved to me on the weekend he's one tough cookie. I mean, he can take the punch and he can give the punch, and he got up from his knockdowns and came back with a fury.
Last bell boxing, by the way. Vitaly is next. How I see it with Vladimir, you had that. Obviously, when Fury fought him, Fury was the one that was keeping his distance.
Yep.
And it was a boxing masterclass. Now, if you had Fury, okay, Vladimir was 40 at the end, whatever his career was. There was just one fight afterwards. With the bigger Fury, he wouldn't be fighting in that style. It would be more of a stand-up, and it would be a physical fight. One thing that Vladimir had a big issue with is endurance. And what do we have here? We have Fury, the endurance zapper, with his leaning. Bear in mind that Klitschko, Vladimir, used to lean on. He was the king of leaning on people.
Right.
I mean, the worst. I was about to say the best example. The worst example was against Povetkin. Went the distance. That's when Povetkin was unbeaten, and God, it was something like 10 knockdowns. But it wasn't from punches. It was from him leaning on him or just clubbing after leaning.
Right.
Vladimir. That was one of the big things that Manny taught him, and how to use his size after a few defeats. And I just think that, bearing in mind that is Fury's forte, Fury is the bigger one, and now the heavier one, I think that would be, with Vladimir, completely negated, and I think that would be an easy fight for Fury. The one that I think that he would have problems with is Vitali. Never been down, harder punch, even if he's not a one-punch artist.
Right.
Tall, long levers. That would be probably the only one of 2 or 3 fighters that would be able to give, I think, just in my opinion, Fury problems. And that would be a very good fight. Vitali would just go in with whoever, regardless of the size, and he did very well against tall fighters, and there was no issue. You have power, every box was ticked, apart from just not the exciting in any way. Wasn't a talker, wasn't the quickest, wasn't the flashiest. He was just consistent, but what he did worked. For the fact that he, like a lot of the heavyweights we mentioned earlier, was able to go away and come back and appear to be as good as ever. No difference. When he retired, or semi-retired, or did retire, he was given the, God, I've never been able to pronounce it, the Demetrius or whatever. It's probably way off by the WBC, meaning he could go back at any time and directly fight for the WBC title, which he did with Samuel Peter. Come back and he ruled the roost again, and then the rest again is history. That's somebody that Fury would struggle with. That would be.
And I didn't know this until while you were speaking. I just checked. I didn't realize that Vitali was actually 6'7".
Yeah, but he's that little bit taller than Vladimir. When you see them two side by side, you just got that little difference there.
Yeah.
Okay, next person. Let's go back.
Holyfield. Not a chance.
Yeah, you see, Holyfield did struggle with larger fighters. He lost to Bo in the first fight. As much as he came in, it's a good thing how they come back from defeats heavier. That's the one thing that Manny Stewart did with Holyfield, was actually bulk him up further. But in the rematch with Bo, Holyfield was heavier, and so was Bo, and it was a majority decision win for Holyfield. But as much as Holyfield did win it, Bo kind of lost it with the help of a guy parachuted into the ring. Bo knocked him out at the third fight. What other big fighters did Holyfield fight? Valuev actually had Holyfield winning that fight. But how the hell they had Valuev winning that, I really don't know. I've watched that 2 or 3 times. I just cannot give it to him. But that aside, it's the bigger people. That's what caused Holyfield the problem. That's why there was the problem with Tyson. Right, let's go back further. Let's say
our boy Chinese Yoda brings up a good point there. Chinese Yoda says Holyfield got beat by fat old man James Toney.
Yeah, he was unfortunately past his best. Because that was in 2003. He was past his best then. What was that? You had the 2 losses to Lewis.
Yeah.
Then he lost to Donald. What's his name? Larry Donald. Donald, I think it was on points. Then it was the Tony fight or something. Yeah, he got clocked by that one. He was just on his way down. For somebody to draw, win, and lose to Ruiz. Yeah. No, he was. He hung around way too long. As we saw at 57 the other week. That's a different story. I'm trying to think something. Okay, Tyson against Fury. How would you see that?
Mike Tyson?
Did
we talk
against
about him
Fury?
already?
Yep. What would you think would be the answer?
Mike Tyson. I don't know. I'm not going to say he was a really great. I really enjoyed Mike Tyson prior to all of his, let's say, troubles. And so when he was in his prime and he was just knocking out guys left, right, and center, he was a joy to watch, an absolute joy to watch. And he was ferocious in the ring, absolutely ferocious. People were genuinely afraid of him. But even at that level, could he beat Tyson Fury? I would argue no.
That's the one where I've got a question mark. It would be a big deficit.
Well, what is he? Is he 5?
He's 5'10". They used to say in the
5'10",
intros 5'11", but it was supposedly 5'10". His average fighting weight was around the 216 mark, and that was very consistent. It only ever went up, I think, at the tail end of the it was the 2000s. He started going up to the 230 mark. He came in, I think, 233, I think, was his heaviest weight. But yeah, it's just that size deficit. Okay, let's go back further. Let's say Larry Holmes.
Hang on. I would just argue, though, that Mike Tyson would come out fast and furious, and he got his knockouts by surprise. Like, he would surprise the opposition by how furious he could fight. So but that's what I had said would give Deontay Wilder his advantage if he was going to exploit it at all, was to come out fast and furious in those early rounds and then try to rely on that devastating right. Otherwise, he was going to lose, and that's ultimately what happened. Mike Tyson, he's too small. I don't think he could. I don't think he was he known as an inside fighter. I don't think so.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yep. The times he was, yes, at his peak, he was.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think he
was the complete, apart from size, complete package.
Well, in that case,
for 3 years, 85 to 88.
So in that case, you'd have to argue that a Usyk would fit into that package and attempt to fight Tyson Fury on the inside. So good luck to him.
Yeah, good luck for that one. Somebody said Ike, just saw Ike Ibeabuchi, if you want to pronounce it that way. There's different ways of pronouncing it. Yeah, that's one of the biggest wasted talents ever. He seemed to have it all until he was put inside for I think woman assault or rape or something. Funny thing is, he's been released and he's even speaking about a comeback. That was about 6 months ago, but it's not going to happen. He's very muscular. He's been training while he's been inside, but there was nothing there of any kind of substance to certainly warrant writing about it yet. He was just there recording in the hallway to his flat or something, saying that he's great shape, he's going to make a comeback. We shall see, but no, that's too many years. But God, he was great. I know John Ruiz wasn't exactly top tier, but nobody did that to John Ruiz. What was it, 19 seconds? I think he was KO'd by with Ibeabuchi. Beat a lot of the good fights, knocked out Chris Bird, which was something that didn't happen, and the New Zealand chap as well, Tua, and he had him when Tua was raging. Ibeabuchi, that biggest waste of talent. Shame, because he was good. He ticked every box. Absolutely. Big shame. Okay, let's go back and let's get really sentimental. Okay, Larry Holmes.
On a personal level, I really enjoyed Larry Holmes. I remember him quite well as a young man. Not him, but me as a young man. In the ring. So he exuded a really great personality. So I enjoyed watching his fights and hoped for a good outcome for him personally. But again, I thought he fought on not adrenaline per se, but the rush of the fight, if you will. And not to say that he wasn't trained, not to say that he wasn't any good, not to say that he didn't have any skill. He did. But he emotional. He was an emotional boxer, if you ask me, to watch him anyway. And therefore, toss the coin. He might be able to win that fight that night or not, depending on how he was, I don't know, feeling. Was he the type of guy? I don't know. He seemed to be, emotionally flat, very well guarded. So anyway, so it's a hard question. I don't think you would have that fire that is absolutely required to go up against a guy like Tyson Fury. I just don't think Larry Holmes would have it in that sense.
I think Tim answering that question would be an interesting one because obviously he shared the ring with Holmes, pushed him very hard actually over 15 rounds. Curious to hear his remarks about that. Obviously, with him being from that era when he was at his peak, that would be interesting. God, I've seen things with Tommy Morrison coming up. No, he had thing with Morrison. Just an opinion. He did have stamina issues. Again, you've got somebody now with Fury who is a stamina sapping juggernaut. That would be, it'd have to, Morrison would only be effective early. He would lose his stamina, which was his issue. It took him he pushed Lewis quite well, but that was six round loss. Stamina would be a problem. Just an opinion.
So I just want to quickly go back to Larry Holmes because, again, while you're clicking away here, and I didn't realize this. So Larry Holmes, who held that WBC heavyweight title from 78 to 83. So I'd been in university in that time. Anyway, during that title reign, he defended his title against 19 opponents, the second most in history behind Joe Louis. I did not realize that.
Yep. He did very well until he ran into Michael Spinks.
Right.
And Spinks beat him twice. The funny thing with Holmes's career, he was, he lost to Spinks twice, retired, come back in 88 to fight Tyson, got sparked in the 4th round after doing reasonably well. Now he was 38 at that point, but then made a comeback against the fighter Tim Doc Anderson. And this last sort of period of time, his last fight was against Eric Butterbean Esch. I think it's 2000, his last fight. But throughout that comeback, when he was considered way, way, way past his best, he went the distance with Holyfield and pushed him quite well. He went in with Oliver McCall before Bruno defeated him, pushed him quite well. And he would lose. I mean, for example, he lost against Brian Nielsen, a Danish boxer. But he held his own. He beat a lot of not top-tier fighters, but people that are sort of fringe. He was at that level for years. He did so well, which was remarkable. And bearing in mind, he was, considered way, way, way past his best at 38. And that goes back to what I said earlier, how they started sort of being able to go on a lot later on in their career. That was remarkable because he was able to hold it so much. One thing actually about Holmes, I don't know if you ever noticed. Did you see the Holmes versus Holyfield fight?
I'm going to say probably.
Did you notice at the end, as soon as the bell rang?
Well, you're talking the 80s,
right? No, that was 93.
Oh,
I do 93
later.
Hold on a second. 92 Bow rematch 93. So it could have been 90. I think it was 93 or 94. Anyway, I haven't got a computer open. As soon as he turned around, he absolutely projectile vomited. It's something that's just quite never seen that happen with a fighter. The bell rang, turned around, everywhere. Bearing in mind, he did quite well against Holyfield, but no, remarkable. I'm curious when you're on with Tim next. Try, if you can, to ask him what his views are against, with him, sort of Holmes and the fighters from around that period of time.
Yeah,
bearing in mind these fighters were very much 215 to 225 max was a lot of their weights, unless you were Tony Tubbs when he would come in around 240s, or Greg Page, because you had a lot of lazy heavyweights in the early 80s that were putting on weight. And that's why the title, unless, apart from the WBC one, which was held for so long by Holmes, it was the rest of them was just going from fighter to fighter to fighter just because of weight and lack of training and motivation. I'm going to say it. Sorry if you're going to watch at some point, Tim included. I'm sure you know that situation with the chats with him better than most. Okay, so that was Holmes. Okay, let's get really sentimental. Ali, let's upset some people. The greatest.
The greatest of all time. Wow. In his prime. In his prime.
Okay. Cassius, the earlier.
No,
know he was,
not in his earlier days. No, you know why? Because then you just don't have that experience, and
he was a cruiserweight, not a bridgerweight, not a heavyweight.
to put a young fighter like Cassius Clay, whomever, into the ring right now against Tyson Fury is homicide. Cassius Clay would not be able to beat now. Could
Okay, Muhammad Ali
in his prime?
Okay, so after the 3.5 years out,
Yep.
he lost, say, Joe Frazier, the fight of the century. That was on points. And he seemed to improve from, he could be argued probably the best from the second Frazier fight to his last best fight was either the Foreman fight or obviously the Thriller in Manila. He was never the same after that. But let's say around the Joe Frazier, the second fight, where he was probably at his peak at that point, or just about up to age 32 when he beat Foreman. Bear in mind his weight then would have been, this is just a guess, it probably would have been about the 215 mark. I probably would have thought 215, 220 maybe actually. So with those stats at the peak as such, what do you think?
So this is where I take stock in my comment earlier when it comes to technique and being innovative on your feet in the ring, and that's exactly what Muhammad Ali was great at, adjusting to whoever he was fighting at that moment. It's you only have to watch one of those fights, I can't remember, where he was bouncing off the ropes, coming back, dodging, and no one had ever seen that before, ever. I mean, this was like, what the heck is he doing? But at the end, you couldn't get away with that kind of innovation in today's ring against Tyson Fury. He's too big. He's too good. For a big guy, he defends incredibly well. Yes, he leaves himself open from time to time, as we saw on Saturday, but still can take that punch. So at the end of the day, could Muhammad Ali in his prime, not Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali in his prime defeat Tyson Fury? My answer, no.
Completely agree. Absolutely. Too much of a deficit. It would be interesting, but it's this thing where, it used to be from Fury and the people beating this drum used to be, oh, greatest of all time would have, anybody who's good over the past 15, 20 years, would have, sort of stood up to anybody in history or the rest of it. Now, this is the first time, okay, you could say it with Lewis probably, but this is really the first time we can actually say, God, actually, and a lot of people won't want to actually agree that this is the case, but he actually probably would. Most, all, maybe. And the problem with a lot of these fighters that we're now talking about is there's nothing to base. Well, he did well against this big fighter of 6'6", of 6'7". There is nothing now to at all. I mean, you could say with Holmes that Cooney was 6'5". But there's nothing with these old fighters where there's anything against anyone big to even sort of try and have some evidence, for their, with their side, with, arguing their case, because they just weren't, that was cruiserweights knocking out cruiserweights or
right.
bridgerweight. I think we should possibly continue with this tomorrow.
Sure.
And expand a little bit more, just looking at the time with a lot of the, because we do, I'm very good at that, go off of it. And instead of Fury versus heavyweights, how about we just move on to the heavyweights in general and how they would fare against each other? What do you reckon?
Absolutely. That sounds like a fun discussion.
Easy. Until then. Okay.
Yeah, we'll see you then. Right. Cheers, guys.
Take care.